The Africa Center for Statistics in the last 6 months has been able to achieve many things, several things really that I would like to discuss with you, perhaps not all of them, but I'm going to just highlight the key issues that we've been able to do. I think one of them really is that we've been able to develop what I call a roadmap on transformation and modernizing the statistical system for countries on the continent. And the whole idea behind this modernizing of the statistical system is to ensure that they have systems that are interoperable, in other words, systems that talk to each other to be able to produce data as timely as possible. That's one. But also to begin to use or apply what we call modern technologies, modern approaches. For instance, web scraping of data. That you go on the internet, you're able to web scrap data. You probably do the scanning of the data without having to go out to countries or to the respondents to be able to give you the data. We have also been able to apply now artificial intelligence in part of that collection of the data, and we are impacting this knowledge to the countries, and we are seeing countries really making changes. As you may have seen lately, countries now are undertaking their censuses and producing the data at the minimum 2 months. At most, we have had countries producing them in 3 months. That has never been the case. In the past, what we have seen, countries were producing the census data after 5 years. So you can imagine we have reduced that 5 years to 2 months, at most 3 months, which is an achievable thing. But also there are other areas that we've been able to make really progress, is that instead of having physical mapping of the areas now for enumeration, we have been able to produce applications for georeferencing. That has been done by the Africa Center for Statistics. We've been able to produce dashboards that countries are using to monitor undertaking of surveys without having to get someone to go into the field. You can actually sit in your office, look at the iPad, and be able to tell what's happening at country level. Who is collecting data? When are they submitting? What are the issues? So that has reduced the costs tremendously. There are other examples that I would like to cite with you, that one of the things I think we've been able to do is that it's around the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And in particular, there's what we call, which contributes to the regional value chains or the global value chains, is what we call the trade value added. In other words, what kind of value does each process contribute? For the first time, we have been able to put in place a database. We started with small countries. We have now about 5 countries in that database, and the intention is to scale up. And all these things have actually happened this year. The idea to scale up so that we have a database where we have what we call TIVA indicators, the trade value added indicators, so that we actually know whether CFTA is actually going in the direction that we require. What kind of information do we need to be able to measure the trade that is taking place between countries? The other significant, in our view, that we've been able to do is also improvement around the civil registration and vital statistics systems. That too, now we're calling it ECRVS. In other words, it is now electronic, it's digitalized, information is being collected straight from the mothers, some of them in their smartphones, to report when a birth has occurred, to report when a death has occurred. That we've been able to do that, and helping countries, of course, to also change their systems in terms of the legislation around digitalization of these things that I'm talking about. But one other thing what I think much more even significant than what I said was significant, is that as the Africa Center for Statistics, we work with a pool of young statisticians all over the continent. These are young statisticians, some of them in employment, most of them not in employment. We also know very well that these young statisticians are tech savvy. They are the ones that know the applications of computer science, for instance, the data science issues, large language models and artificial intelligence. They understand these things very well. So we've been able to work with these people. Why? Because we instituted a program in ECA, which we call Takwimu. Takwimu means statistics. Takwimu is the Swahili language. It means statistics or mathematics. So that Takwimu is a program for young statisticians, and what we have done, we have allowed these people to have access to different sources of information. So what we've done more recently is that we have reached out to the UN resident coordinators to say, look, we have this pool of statisticians, young statisticians, who are willing to help you. Can you take them as interns or as fellows? So we have a few countries that have volunteered, the regional coordinators really, who have volunteered. So, oh, yeah, we want some of those. Can we have their CVs? So we've been able to send their CVs to those that have requested, and some of them have hired as interns, as fellows, through this program that we have initiated ourselves. So why are we doing this? We realize that the Africa Center for Statistics, that if this continent has to develop, if this continent has to transform, it has to rely on young people because they are the future. They are the ones that will determine what will actually happen in 2063. And that they should begin to map their road between now until their own end, until their own exit. So we are giving this opportunity to young statisticians, but also we are trying to reach out to the network of young economists because they need to talk to each other to be able to produce the information that is required. So those are just some of the highlights that we've been able to achieve this particular in the last 6 months. But what do we want to do going forward? Now, the Africa Center for Statistics supports all the 54 member countries of the UN in Africa. And what we do, like I said earlier on, is to support countries to be able to produce data that is credible, data that is usable, data that is required for now. And by doing that, it means we need to develop or build sustained statistical systems that are able to produce this, that are agile to be able to respond even to the issues of COVID, for instance. Because what we saw during COVID, some of the offices closed because they did not have the platform to be able to operate in a situation where people are not able to get out of their houses. Data was never collected. But now with the system that we are producing, even if they don't go out, they will be able to produce the information through the smartphones. So going forward, really our focus is to transform, to modernize the national statistical system, increase data literacy. People should be data literate to be able to understand the information that they need and how to use it. That's going to be one of our biggest focus going forward. But more importantly, one of the bigger part of it is really how do we get information to inform the SDGs? We are now halfway. How can we rescue the SDGs? How can we accelerate the SDGs? So one way of doing that is really to make sure that we work with the countries to collect the information that is required to be able to inform the SDGs, to inform the Agenda 2063. So that is going to be our prime area. But then also we want to make sure that in the part of that informing the data around those areas is that can we disseminate this information in a much easier way? Instead of producing a 40-page text, can we produce a 5-page infographics in an easier way to be able to read? So one of the things that we want to really inject a lot of resources in infographics to disseminate the data very quickly, someone to look at a couple of pages and be able to make an opinion. And that is the things that we want to go in going forward. But that requires for us to also to do what I call the integration of statistics and GIS, to be able to come to show information now, overlay on the maps, that when you look at the map, you already can make a decision, oh, this is where areas people are having a problem with poverty, or there's unemployment in the area, just by looking at the map. So we're making that integration of GIS and statistics going forward. And finally, I think one of the areas that we want to do is data integration, systems to be able to speak to each other. Right now, even if you look in one country, there are different entities that are producing information on one person. And you need to get an ID for each one of those. You have maybe 4 IDs in your pocket. Can we have an integrated system that only has one ID and speaks to different aspects by making it foundational and also a functional ID? So that's the thinking as we go forward, in the coming years, but of course, in the coming months. But of course, we want to work with others. We will realize we cannot do these things on our own as ECA. We need the academia. We need the NGOs. We need the private sector. The private sector are very important because they have the resources. They have the money. They have the equipment. They have the tools. To be honest, they even have more data than we do because they have capacity to do that.